Hello everyone, I am Arya and this is a demonstration for my master thesis, a fair compliant semantic interoperability framework for integrating maternal healthcare data between community health workers and referral hospitals in Kenya. Before I start, I want to acknowledge the people and communities that made this work possible. Thank you to the organizers and participants of the Sensitive Data Sovereignty Conference in Kenya, whose discussions shaped my understanding of this project. Thank you to Wodan Africa and Pumwani Hospital for hosting and deploying the repositories this framework runs on and for the broader work that they are doing to build out the African health data space. And a heartfelt thank you to the teams at KCI and Pumwani Maternity Hospital, especially Whitney and William Nanva, for welcoming us during the field visit and generously sharing their time, their workflows, and their real experiences. Last but not the least, I want to thank my supervisor, Professor Dr. Miriam Van Ryzen, for her support and guidance. Coming back to the problem, the core problem this addresses is that a community health unit and a referral hospital each keep their own records about the same patient. Those records use different structures, different identifiers, and different terminology, so there's no simple way today to see one continuous picture of her care. What I've built connects these two independently owned data sets using a shared ontology RDF and federated SparkQL. This happens without either side ever having to hand over or merge their data into the other's system. I'm going to show that live, starting from what anyone would actually discover this from where anyone would actually discover this data, the African Health Data Space. This is the African Health Data Space, a federated data ecosystem built under the Wodan Africa initiative. It connects fair data points from different institutions so that datasets can be discovered and queried without being centralized into one place. You can see there are already a few datasets registered here from across the network. This isn't a one off demo environment, it's a live growing ecosystem, and as more and more researchers bring their own fair compliant datasets online, those get added to this same discoverable listing too. Two of these entries are mine, one for the Community Health Unit KCI and one for Pumwani Maternity Hospital. Notice these are two separate dataset listings pointing to two separate repositories, not one combined dataset. This separation is deliberate and it matters. In this thesis, I refer to this as localization. Each organization's data stays on infrastructure that organization itself operates and controls. The CHU's repositories lives on KCI's own servers and the hospital's repository lives on Pumwani's own server. Neither copy of the data is held by the researcher, AHDS, or by any third party. And that's also why there are two data sets here instead of one merged data set. If I had combined CHU and hospital records into a single repository, I'd have collapsed exactly the ownership boundary this framework is meant to preserve. The hospital would effectively be holding CHU data and vice versa, and neither side would have a clean answer to who is actually responsible for this record. Keeping them as two independently deployed and owned repository connected only by a number of corresponding links, like has corresponding patient and has corresponding referral, means each organization can prove at any point exactly which data is their own. Ownership and localization are the reason it's built as two repositories and not one. Now I'm going now I'm going to log in so I can actually query both of these. For this demonstration, I'm using a single set of credentials that give me access to both the CHU and the hospital repository at once. I want to flag something here as a limitation. In the architecture as designed, each repository has its own separate credential set. The CHU's is held by KCI and the hospitals is held by Pumwani, and neither side's credential grant access to the other's repository by default. That's what I defined in this thesis as confidentiality through the authenticated access. What I'm using right now, one combined login reaching both through AHDS, is not how this would run in a real deployment. Allegrograph itself already supports much finer grained access control than what AHDS is currently exposing here. Separate accounts, separate permission levels, ideally down to a read only account for an individual clinician versus a read write account for the data pipeline itself. So the underlying repositories are capable of this today. What's still being built out is the access control layer on top at the HDS level. This would let each organization issue and manage its own repository credentials rather than relying on one shared login the way I'm demonstrating here. That layer is exactly what other researchers are actively working on right now on top of the semantic architecture I've built. I'll come back to this in the end. Let's run some queries now. Even though I'm logged in with one combined authentication, I'm still hitting two separate endpoints, and each one only ever results its own organization data. This first query asks the CHU repository for its registered community health units, and that's all it gives back. If I point the same kind of query at the hospital repository instead, asking for its registered facility information, I get the hospital's data from the hospital repository and nothing from the CHU side leaks into it. This is the practical proof of what I described as localization. One login for convenience during this demo does not mean one merged dataset underneath it. The repository themselves never got combined. I'm just allowed to knock on both doors. But not every question can be answered from one side alone. Let me show you what it looks like when a query genuinely does need to reach across. This is the end-to-end continuity of care chain from my thesis. It starts entirely on the CHU side, a client, their recorded danger sign, and their CHU referral. And then, through the service clause, it reaches directly into the hospital's own repository to pull in that same client's visit, HIV care record, and confirmed positive VDRL result. This is a client whose community level disclosure, referral, and hospital confirmed syphilis diagnosis can now be traced as one continuous record instead of three disconnected facts sitting in two different systems. Now, here's the point which I want to make clear because this is the query where everything matters. Service reaching into the hospital's endpoint doesn't mean the CHU now owns, holds, or has copied the hospital's data. It only works because I'm separately authenticated against the hospital's repository too. In a real deployment, that the whole hospital's own credentials issued and controlled by the hospital will not somehow be something CHU can grant itself. And even authenticated, what comes back is a scoped answer. It returns exactly the fields this query asks for: a visit, a care, a VDRL result for exactly the clients this query matches. Nothing more. The hospital's full repository was never exposed, never merged, and never left Pumwani's own infrastructure. It answered one specific authorized question and nothing beyond it. That's confidentiality through authenticated access and localization working together. Querying is not owning, service lets this data be found and reasoned across. It doesn't let it be taken. Each side simply lets a specific authorized question be answered using its own data on its own term. Coming back to what I flagged earlier about the login, right now this deployment uses only one authenticated service account per repository in production, and as you saw, a shared combined credential for this demonstration specifically. Building out finer grained access control is exactly the kind of governance work needed before a framework like this could move from a research demonstration to a real production deployment. That work is actively being carried out by other researchers in the Vodan Africa network, working on the access control and governance layer that sits above the semantic architecture I've built here. This thesis focuses on the semantic interoperability and entity resolution problem, connecting the two datasets meaningfully and traceably. The access control refinement is a necessary next step, and it's already recognized as a future work in my evaluation. Thank you so much.